What if the destiny of a nation could vanish in a single night? Not through elections, not through treaties, but through armored trucks racing across the desert with cargo designed to erase a people's tomorrow. What if the lives of millions no longer rested in the hands of distant allies, but in the heartbeat of one man who chose to stand, while others whispered of surrender? That man was Captain Ibrahim Traoré. In a land too often dismissed as fragile, forgotten, and expendable, he rose not as a politician behind polished doors, but as a soldier forged in the dust of battle, on a night when silence hid the hum of engines, when darkness concealed the weight of weapons meant for chaos. Traoré faced a question larger than himself. Could courage stop what money and power had already set in motion? This is not the tale of drones and rifles alone. It is the story of dignity defended, of a young leader who believed that freedom must be seized before it is stolen. Stay with us, for this is not just another story. It is the future our ancestors dreamed of. Subscribe and join us for an Africa that will never bow its head again. Burkina Faso is a country where history seems to arrive not as chapters, but as storms. For decades, the people endured waves of drought, poverty, and terror, sweeping down from the north. Villages were emptied overnight. Schools turned into ruins. Families fled with nothing but the clothes on their backs, as armed groups carved shadows into the land. In the midst of this turmoil, a young man from Bondokui grew restless. Ibrahim Traoré, born in 1988, did not inherit power or wealth. He inherited only the soil, the struggle, and the stories of ancestors who had stood tall before colonizers. He entered university as a geology student, studying the stones beneath his feet. But destiny pulled him elsewhere into the army. There, among uniforms and rifles, he discovered a path where courage mattered more than birthright. Years of service hardened him. He fought alongside peacekeepers in Mali, watched comrades fall, and carried scars that did not show on his skin. He saw how insurgents grew stronger, not because they were brave, but because foreign powers allowed the weapons to keep flowing. Every loss on the battlefield carved a single thought deeper into his mind. Burkina Faso could not survive by waiting for help that never came. By 2022, the nation had endured 2 coups in 1 year. The palace in Ouagadougou became a revolving door of generals and promises, each one collapsing faster than the last. But when Traoré stepped forward, the world saw something different. He was young, too young, some said, just 34. But his age was not weakness, it was defiance. While others carried the fatigue of compromise, he carried the fire of conviction. His speeches were not polished with diplomatic charm. They were raw, almost sharp, spoken in the cadence of a soldier, not a politician. We are not fighting for victory, he told his people. We are fighting for survival. To some, it sounded desperate. To others, it was truth long denied. Traoré stripped away illusion. He asked French troops to leave. He turned his gaze toward Africa itself, forging bonds with Mali and Niger, declaring that the Sahel would no longer kneel before outside masters. His words resonated not only in dusty markets and village squares, but in the hearts of men and women who remembered Sankara, the revolutionary who once promised dignity through self-reliance. And yet, with every declaration came danger. Attacks by insurgents surged, thousands perished, millions fled their homes. International headlines painted the country as a failed state, but within its borders a different story was taking shape. It was the story of a people who believed that their leader was not hiding in palaces but standing among them, walking the same dirt roads, bearing the same risk. By 2025, whispers spread beyond borders. Was this young captain merely another soldier who seized power, or was he the spark of something larger, a new Africa rising from beneath centuries of chains? Crowds chanted his name, painting murals on city walls, carrying his image in protests that demanded sovereignty. But faith is always tested, and destiny does not wait politely at the door. One night, across the silent desert, engines began to hum. A convoy of steel and secrecy moved under the cover of darkness, carrying weapons that could break a nation in a single stroke. And for Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the question would no longer be about politics or speeches. It would be about whether he was willing to gamble everything, even his life, for the promise he had made. But on one night, the whisper of engines across the desert would test whether his resolve was only words or destiny itself. The desert has a way of swallowing sound, turning every noise into a secret. On that night, what stirred the silence was not wind, nor the distant call of animals, but the grinding roar of engines. A convoy moved like a serpent across the sands, armored trucks, their frames heavy with steel, their wheels leaving scars in the earth. To the untrained eye, they looked like ordinary transports, but inside lay something far more dangerous than grain or supplies. Packed into crates were drones, armed with payloads, encrypted radios that could outmaneuver any local communication, night vision goggles, surveillance devices capable of turning darkness into daylight, and rifles designed for precision death. These were not tools of defense, they were instruments of domination. and they were not bound for a national arsenal. They were destined for insurgents who thrived on terror. Men whose goal was not victory, but chaos itself. Burkina Faso was already bleeding. Entire regions had fallen under insurgent control. More than 17,000 lives had been lost since Traoré took power. Villages burned. Farmers executed. Families displaced. The arrival of such weapons would not just worsen the war, it would tip the balance permanently. Once those machines entered rebel hands, no school, no hospital, no village would be safe again. Where did these weapons come from? The answer lay shrouded in whispers. Some pointed to smugglers hiding behind humanitarian NGOs, trucks disguised as carriers of rice or vaccines. Others spoke of foreign sponsors, great powers, who preferred instability over independence, who would rather see the Sahel in flames than free of their grasp. Officially, no country admitted involvement. Unofficially, everyone knew weapons. This advance did not appear in rebel camps by accident. In Ouagadougou, the capital, the night was restless. Inside the presidential compound, lights burned long past midnight. Ibrahim Traoré stood before a window, his hands clasped behind his back, staring into the distance as though he could pierce the desert itself. Minutes earlier, intelligence had arrived. The convoy was real, its path confirmed by satellite, and whispers from the ground. It would cross the border before dawn. If it succeeded, Burkina Faso would be forced to fight not just insurgents, but shadows armed with the future of war. Traoré knew this better than anyone. He had seen comrades cut down by ambushes, watched civilians slaughtered, because their government lacked the tools to protect them. He could almost hear the voices of the children whose laughter would vanish, the mothers who would bury their sons, the fathers who would flee in shame. Around him, advisors argued in frantic tones, some urged caution. Intercepting such a heavily armed convoy was suicide. Others suggested negotiations with foreign backers, a plea for mercy disguised as diplomacy. One man even muttered about letting the trucks pass. To fight another day. Traoré listened in silence. His jaw tightened, his eyes sharp as a blade. He was not a man to be moved by fear, nor by the false comfort of delay. Finally, his voice broke through the noise. If that convoy crosses the border, he said slowly, we are no longer fighting for victory. We are fighting for survival. The room fell still. The words were not shouted. They were whispered with the weight of mountains. And in that whisper was something heavier than any speech. Resolve. Traoré was not merely calculating tactics. He was deciding the fate of his nation. He looked once more toward the horizon, though nothing could be seen from the city. In his mind, he pictured the trucks, their engines growling, their cargo humming with menace. He imagined the mercenaries guarding them, men confident in their invisibility, convinced that no one dared stand in their way. But they had not counted on him. Traoré turned from the window, his voice calm but commanding. Mobilize the units. Tonight, we defend tomorrow. He gave the order and history itself shifted. War is never only about weapons. It is about choices, and the weight those choices place on the shoulders of a single man. As the news of the convoy reached the heart of Ouagadougou, Captain Ibrahim Traoré made his choice. The decision was swift, but not reckless. He had lived too long with the cost of hesitation to allow doubt to rule him now. Inside the command center, maps were spread across long tables, their edges held down by stones and rifles. Red lines marked the convoy's expected route, drawn like veins across the pale desert. Circles denoted choke point, ridges, and dunes that could conceal an ambush. Overhead, satellite images flickered on screens, tiny dots, representing steel monsters, rolling through the night. Traoré moved among his officers like a commander forged from the very soil. He did not stand above them. He stood among them. His words were not speeches but instructions, clear, firm, and steady. We strike here. We cut the road here. We close the jaws before they know they are hunted. His voice carried certainty, and in that certainty his men found strength. The soldiers began to prepare. Some were veterans, men who had buried brothers in shallow graves, their eyes heavy with memory. Others were young, barely more than boys, their hands trembling as they checked their rifles, but in each of them beat the same resolve. Tonight they were not merely soldiers. Tonight they were guardians, standing between chaos and survival. They moved like shadows through the compound, loading vehicles with ammunition, rolling out spike strips, testing rocket launchers whose very weight seemed heavier than their bodies. Boots thudded against the earth in rhythm, a heartbeat of determination that echoed through the night. Among them, Traoré walked silently. He paused to place a hand on a soldier's shoulder, to exchange a nod with another. These were not gestures of ceremony. They were bonds woven in fire. His presence reminded them of something no speech could capture, that he would not send them where he would not go himself. Far from the city, on the open plain, the desert seemed to hold its breath. The stars burned like watchful eyes as units spread out, crawling into position. Trucks rolled forward without headlights, their engines muffled, moving like predators, stalking prey. In the silence, thoughts stirred in every man's mind. Would they live to see dawn? Would their sacrifice matter if the convoy broke through? The questions clawed at them, but so did another. Could they let fear define them when everything they loved stood behind them? Traoré's voice came low across the comms, steady as a drumbeat. Do not rush. Let them think they are safe. Let them believe the night belongs to them. When the time comes, we will show them whose desert this truly is. His men exhaled, their nerves tightening into focus. Somewhere in the dark, a soldier whispered a prayer. Another pressed a photograph of his family into his vest. These small rituals bound them together, as much as orders did. And then, as the convoy rolled closer, the plan tightened. Vehicles fanned out. A flash of light on a ridge, the signal. Enginist growled. Wheels tore into the sand. The desert shuddered as hunters closed in on prey. If you believe that Africa has always needed this, write amen in the comments below. The night was alive with engines, and the desert was about to choose sides. The desert does not forgive arrogance. The convoy thundered forward, engines roaring with the false confidence of men who believed themselves invisible. But in the stillness of the dunes, Burkina Faso's soldiers waited, and when the signal came, the night exploded. Gunfire cracked across the plain, sharp and merciless. Bullets tore through the darkness, sparks dancing against steel as tires screamed across the sand. From ridges and dunes, shadows rose, young men with rifles. Veterans with steady hands, their movements precise, measured, unshaken. They did not fight with rage. They fought with conviction. The mercenaries reacted in chaos. Shouts ripped through the night as they scrambled to return fire. Their rifles spat flame. Tracer rounds streaked red and gold across the desert sky. And grenades shook the ground beneath men's boots. But fear is a clumsy ally. For the first time, the drivers realized they were not hunters in the desert. They were prey. One truck swerved violently, trying to break through the blockade. Its engine roared like a beast, headlights slicing into the night. Soldiers dove aside as bullets rattled against its armor. For a heartbeat, it seemed unstoppable. Then, with a thunderous blast, a rocket screamed through the air. The explosion lit up the desert like false dawn, the truck flipping into fire, its deadly cargo scattering across the sand. No one cheered. The soldiers tightened their grips. They knew victory was not yet in their hands. At the command post, Ibrahim Traoré leaned over maps, his eyes unblinking as explosions flickered on the horizon. His voice cut through static and fear alike. Hold your ground. Do not let a single truck pass. Tonight, we prove that no power can buy our silence. His men heard him, and their spines straightened. To them, he was not a distant figure issuing commands from safety. He was a brother in arms, a soldier who knew their fear and shared their danger. And so they fought not only for their nation, but for him, the symbol who stood among them. The convoy split, engines howling as drivers slammed accelerators. Clouds of dust rising like walls in the dark. But the net was closing. From the east, armored jeeps surged forward. From the west, soldiers advanced, silhouettes etched against the flare of headlights. The desert became a cage, and within it, the convoy thrashed like a trapped beast. Men fell. Some cried out in agony, others in silence. Blood soaked into sand already rich with sacrifice, yet no one faltered. A marksman, steady as stone, silenced a mounted gun that threatened to shred the line. A squad sprinted forward under fire, intercepting crates before they could vanish into the dunes. Every action was survival carved into motion. Then came the juggernaut, the largest truck of them all, barreling through the chaos, its armored frame shrugging off bullets. If it escaped, the mission would crumble. Soldiers braced themselves, prepared to give everything. And then, from a ridge, a lone figure steadied his launcher. Exhaustion weighed on him, but his eyes did not waver. The rocket flared, streaking into the night. The truck erupted in flame, its cargo consumed in fire. The desert shaking beneath the blast. For a moment, silence reigned. Smoke coiled upward, glowing against the stars. Men on both sides stared, breath caught between defeat and disbelief. Then the gunfire surged again, fiercer, more disparate. But even as fire consumed the trucks, shadows of reinforcements gathered at the edge of the desert. The desert was never silent again. Reinforcements poured into the field, mercenaries trained, disciplined, and ruthless. Their vehicles swept in from the horizon, engines howling, guns blazing. A second storm, descending upon men already battered by hours of fire. Burkina Faso soldiers staggered, their bodies were drenched in sweat and dust, their lungs burning with exhaustion. Many had bled, some could barely lift their rifles, and yet, not one abandoned the line. For in their ears still echoed the voice of their commander. Ibrahim Traoré stepped forward from the command post, his uniform streaked with dirt, his face carved in resolve. His words thundered through radios, but more than that, they thundered through the hearts of his men. Do not yield. Every inch of this ground belongs to the people. Every breath you take tonight carries their hope. Fight not for me, fight for them, for the children who dream of dawn. It was as if the desert itself breathed new life into them. Soldiers who should have collapsed rose once more. Men who had lost strength found it again, carried not by muscle but by conviction. The harder the enemy pressed, the stronger the resistance grew. Gunfire slashed across the dunes. Grenades erupted like thunder, and the sand trembled as vehicles collided in flame. Yet amid the chaos, something deeper emerged. This was no longer simply a battle for territory. It was the soul of a nation at stake. One truck after another fell into the soldiers' hands. Crates were seized, ripped open, revealing the truth of what had been smuggled. Drones capable of carrying bombs. Encrypted radios. Technology meant not to defend, but to enslave. With every capture, the lie of foreign sponsors was exposed. The lie that Africa must always depend, must always kneel, and as reports spread across radios, one phrase rose like a banner in the wind. Captain Ibrahim, latest news. Soldiers whispered it as they fought. Families would later repeat it in markets and villages, and soon the world would read it on screens. For this was no mere skirmish. It was a declaration written in fire. Une déclaration de mon sacrifice. The desert exacted its price. Men fell, their blood mingling with the sand, their names carried into eternity by the cries of their comrades. Traoré felt each loss as though it tore into his own flesh, yet he did not waver. He knew the fallen had not died in vain. Their sacrifice became the mortar of a wall that no mercenary could break. At the height of the struggle, a fresh wave of enemy fire ripped through the lines. Vehicles burned, smoke clawed at the sky. And for a moment, it seemed the resistance might shatter. But then, once more, Traoré's voice rose. Calm, steady, unyielding, steady. Steady. They are not stronger than the hearts that beat beside you. And the tide turned, slowly, inexorably. The mercenaries faltered, their formation cracked, their confidence drained. What they had dismissed as a small, battered army revealed itself as something greater, a force not of numbers, but of unity, discipline, and faith. By the time dawn began to edge the horizon, the battlefield was unrecognizable. Burned-out trucks littered the sand. Weapon lay captured. Survivors stared into the rising sun, with eyes hollowed by fatigue but lit by triumph. The people of Burkina Faso, the world would soon know, had stood against the storm and refused to bow. Already, the phrase spread like fire. Burkina Faso latest news. But it was not merely news, it was testimony. A nation had spoken in the only language. Tyrants understand courage. And yet, victory carries its own weight. For Traoré knew too well. Behind every convoy destroyed was another waiting. Behind every mercenary defeated stood those who had sent them. This battle was not the end. It was the beginning. As dawn broke over the smoldering desert, one question remained. Had this night secured their future, or merely postponed the storm? When the smoke cleared, and the sun rose over the scarred desert, the battle was no longer only about weapons. It was about dignity. It was about a people refusing to have their future stolen in silence. The convoy lay in ruins, its cargo seized, its arrogance punished. And yet, what endured most was not the wreckage, but the will of those who stood unbroken. Captain Ibrahim Traoré walked among his soldiers as one of them, not above them. He clasped shoulders, looked into weary eyes, and spoke words of gratitude. No speech in a palace could have carried more weight than those quiet moments in the sand. And across the villages, across the continent, a story spread. The Captain Ibrahim. Latest news. A tale of a young leader and a nation that would not kneel. But victory did not erase reality. Enemies still lurked beyond borders. Sponsors of chaos still schemed in shadows. The fight for Burkina Faso was far from over. Yet that night had proved something greater, that courage could change the balance, that unity could turn frailty into fire. It was not just Burkina Faso. Latest news, it was Africa's news. A chapter in the long book of liberation. To those watching from afar in Detroit, in Toronto, in Atlanta, in Montreal, this was not only about one desert battlefield. It was about us all. About what happens when black hands refuse to be tools, and instead become builders of destiny. It was about a heritage unfinished, a promise waiting to be fulfilled. So let the words rise louder than the gunfire that tried to silence them. Captain Ibrahim, latest news is not only a headline, it is a reminder that Africa can rise, that Africa must rise. If this story has moved something in your heart, do not let it end here. Type your comment below. New Africa. Africa new. Africa rise. Africa can do it. It's time for Africa. Like, share, speak, subscribe, for our story has been hidden for far too long. Now let us speak our future out loud. Thank you for being here. We'll see you in the next story, the one they still don't want us to hear.